Tina, welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
Thank you for having me, Simon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm really keen to unpack your story and get some of your insights. I will say it's a slightly different take for this episode because typically speaking, we do get the founder or the owner, and it's that little bit of experience. So it's as somebody in your role who was kind of brought in to help the owner, I think we're going to get some different perspectives on this process, which I'm really looking forward to.
Me too. I'm happy to share my story. It's been a lot of fun. So let's dive in.
Yeah, cool. So, look, I know we're going to get to talk about Pathfinder Health Innovations and, of course, what you're doing today. But maybe you could just kick off for us a little bit and just give us your background. Like, where did you do? What did you studied and done different things? What kind of led to that sort of part of the journey that we're going to talk about?
I'm that crazy person that has a PhD in accounting, which most people, when I say the words PhD and then accounting, I usually get cringes when I say that. I wanted to be an accounting professor. I loved to teach and I enjoyed it. I did that. I was relatively young. I went straight through school, undergrad, MBA, PhD. I went to teach at Miami of Ohio and got tenure and was relatively young when I got tenure. And so then I was like, okay, now what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I got an opportunity to go to work at PricewaterhouseCoopers in New York for a wonderful two wonderful gentlemen who became great mentors of mine. They offered me my dream job in the middle of my sabbatical, left academia, traveled the world for them for about 3 years, putting out fires for the CEO, which was one of my favorite jobs of all time. Then the CEO retired, became the CEO of Zurich Financial Services, third largest insurance company in the world globally. I was lucky to be one of the two people that he took with him. So I lived in Switzerland for 2.5 years. They brought me back to the United States to kind of do that whole thing all over again, and it was a turnaround. So financial and cultural turnaround is kind of where my career begins, and it's followed me and has been part of my journey ever since. But that took me to wanting to be a CEO, and I knew I wasn't gonna that wasn't gonna happen, given the hierarchy and all the players. So I got an opportunity to run a claims company, and I did that. Then I got an opportunity from there to run a reinsurance business, but it was very nichey and it had a lot of venture capital aspects to it. So I did that. And then I wasn't having fun anymore. This is part of my journey that I always tell, and people relate to it probably as much as anything. I was burned out, I wasn't having fun, and I decided to just take a break. And I went on sabbatical for a year and promised myself I wouldn't go back to work unless I could respect the people I worked with and for. And I wanted to live a purpose-driven life. And it sounds like a cliche, but it was 100% how I felt. So I took that year, and about 11 months into that year, Pathfinder found me. Um, so Pathfinder Health Innovations is a software development company, and they build software for therapists who treat people on the autism spectrum. I had a younger brother who passed away at the age of 20, but he wasn't supposed to live until 12, and he was just a special needs baby. We didn't know what autism was when he was born, but when I found out and I started to learn about it, I realized he was likely on the spectrum. And so all of those pieces kind of came together, and I got an opportunity to do something really different for me, which is run a software development company, which I'd never done before. But at the center of our universe was the person on the spectrum. And so all of that kind of came together. I'll tell a quick story. When I interviewed with the chairman, with the board of directors for the company, the chairman said, "You've never run a software company before. What makes you think you can run this one?" And I said, "Well, the first time I ran an insurance company was the first time I did that too." So, I know 5 or 6 things. I know what I don't know. I know how to surround myself with smart, talented people who have complementary skill sets. I do know how to ask pretty decent questions because that whole accounting background thing. I'm very honest and transparent in my communications. I challenge the status quo. And I know that culture is everything. And those 6 things are industry agnostic. If you live by those rules, it applies no matter what you're doing. And they picked me over an IT guy. So who would ever think that would happen? But that's kind of what took me to Pathfinder.
That's awesome. That is so. There's so many things that you've just shared with us that I can relate to, and from a sense of purpose to why a typical industry player is often the best person to actually come in and shake things up. So that's really cool. Do you think that element of your brother, um, you know, cuts through a little bit and gives you that extra sense of purpose around a particular company and role?
It really does. As I said, I helped raise him. I was 7 when he was born, and there's something about and there are things you do in your 30s or whatever when you're building your career, and you're just, you're reaching for that next thing. And then there's a time in your life where you go, "Hang on a second, I wanna make a difference. I wanna be part of something." He's always been with me, and he taught me grace and patience, unconditional love like you can't even imagine. And it may sound weird, but I've taken those characteristics and those traits and applied them to every team I've ever led. One of my greatest teams I ever led, different company, it was very, very eclectic. They were very different personality types. But when we came together, we would argue, we would debate inside the boardroom. But I had a rule, and that was when we leave here, the 1,000 people that work with us are gonna see us holding hands and singing Kumbaya because we are a unified management team. And a lot of that comes from, just like I said, love, mercy, and grace. And so I took that with me everywhere I went, and I still take it with me. And yeah, there's something about that part of my life that when I share that story, people go, that explains certain things, why I approach things a certain way. I always try to use more carrots than sticks, as the saying goes. And I truly believe that if you can rally people around a common goal and a common purpose, um, and whether that be teaching a child how to tie his shoes, which I had to do, or finding the next cure for cancer, it all relates.
No wonder you're such a good leader, Tina. Yeah, I just think that's awesome, and I'm a massive believer that culture beats strategy every day of the week.
Every
It's you get, yeah, you get good people and give them a common goal, and they respect each other. They'll do amazing things. And frankly, almost as a leader, you can almost, if you manage to pull that together, you could almost just get out of the way and let those amazing people do brilliant things. Because yeah, it's fascinating.
that was my job. I felt like, is to remove obstacles, and I would tell the team that. I'd be like, "Okay, you guys know the business better than I do. You know what needs to be done. My job is to remove obstacles, get out of your way, but get others out of your way." Right? And take those things on, whether it be the board or whatever outside influences. Yeah, my job is just to let you go be brilliant, and support you.
Yeah,
That's a big piece of it too, especially when you don't know
yeah,
anything about how to write an insurance policy or how to write code. I haven't written computer programming code since like COBOL or something, which was a billion years ago. So, yeah, so that's a big part of it is just listening is a big piece of being a good leader, I think, and empowering your people, holding them accountable, sure, but empower them and get out of their way and remove their obstacles from their path and let them go do great things.
yeah. No, that's very cool. So just to give some context for the listeners, um, Pathfinder, you mentioned, was a software company, but can you just give us a high level for the uninitiated type thing? What did the software do? Like, and who did you sell it to?
Yeah, so the software did 2 things. One, it allowed we sold it to our customers were behavioral therapists. So applied behavioral analysis therapy, ABA, is the only therapy that's been scientifically proven to help people on the autism spectrum. So that was our customer. Our bread and butter customer was that small mom and pop, fewer than 50 employees that had a clinic or taught or in a school and helped people on the spectrum. And it did two things. It helped them file their claims with insurance companies. So we called it practice management. It's typical in software language, but practice management was the piece of the software that helped them file the claims with the insurance company, manage the accounts receivable from the insurance company, and know when they had some issues that they needed to deal with. And the reason I put that first is because actually, my chief technology officer said to me very early on in my tenure with Pathfinder, he said, if they can't collect the money, they're not going to be in business very long. So we feel like that's probably the most important part of the software, which I thought was brilliant on his part. And applied behavior analysis therapists, ABA therapists, are not typically high tech, high savvy. They are hands on people.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest part of what we did was we accelerated their receivables collection. So we did this whole practice management piece. On the clinical side, the clinical piece of the software would they were able to collect data, and data comes in the form of skills acquisition. Again, you set out an education development plan for a person on the spectrum. I'm going to teach you to wash your hands. I want you to be able to tie your shoes. Those kinds of things. You break it into 10 steps, whatever. And the clinical side of the software would allow the therapist to collect the data, graph it, show progress, which then help not only the person, the client, but it also helped the therapist prove to the insurance company that it worked, and this cycle continued. So that's very high level what the software did.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. I've never heard of anything like it. So it's yeah, that's really fascinating. Um, and can you give us a sense of how big was the company by the time you sort of took over, and employees? I don't know if you can talk about turnover and things like that, but just I guess a sense of the size of the business.
Yeah, so I can, since it's been sold and been absorbed, I'm sure I think I can talk a little bit more than I would have been able to a couple of years ago. We had 30 employees, so it was very small. It was about a $2 million top line business. What was interesting about it, it was the first to actually have the integrated solution. So the market for this business is very fragmented. You've got clinical providers, you've got practice management providers, but there were very few that had an integrated solution where you didn't need two systems to run your business. And ours was one of the first to market that was integrated. So again, small, 30 employees, couple $1 million in revenue, but potential to really be so much more because of that integrated solution that we had.
Yeah, interesting. And so I presume the model was it a SaaS kind of model, monthly subscription style business?
Yeah. So the typical SaaS, it was interesting. The clinical part of the business was separate from the practice management. What created Pathfinder was the merger of two different businesses. So the founder of the clinical side merged with a founder of the practice management, brought the two businesses together. So when I took over, the clinical side was very much a typical SaaS subscription model. We were tiered. So, 1 to 10 employee, 1 to 10 clients, this price, 11 to 25, this price. So that was clinical. The practice management module, when we merged, was a percentage of revenue collected pricing model, which was very unique. And ultimately we abandoned it because it didn't work. Ultimately wasn't profitable, but that was that's what I walked into, was sort of percentage of revenues collected. And then on the clinical side, it was number of patients or number of clients, and it was a tier pricing model. So pretty typical SaaS on that side.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Okay. Um, I want to get to in a moment, like what you needed to do when you came on board, like what were the focus and what were the changes you made, and etc. But as I guess as a little kind of lead into that, Can you give us a little bit of context about, I guess, the business owner? Leading up to that role. I mean, I don't know how long the business had been going, but was the owner still involved in the business? What was their kind of, I guess, thinking and headspace? And, I imagine this is a bit of a shift, right, in terms of the company's history and trajectory.
Yeah, so the founder, the owner was still part of the business when I was brought on board. He was part of the selection process. I was actually his first choice, which, you know, he and I are still friends, and we had a lot of conversations about where the business was, what he saw as his own limitations in taking it to the next level, what he thought I could bring to the table. So yeah, he was still part of the business when I came on board, um, but he did recognize that he wasn't going to be able to take it to the next level. And that's why he led the search to really find his replacement in the sense of a CEO.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So had the business kind of, I don't know, plateaued, or was it experiencing some challenges or something like that by the time they were talking to you?
Yeah, in fact, it's probably not going to be news to any of your listeners that the board told me 4 months in they wish they'd found me a year sooner, or 2 years sooner. So the business had plateaued and was suffering actually from a decline in revenue because the software was having latency issues and some other issues that were causing customers some headaches. And when you're dealing with HIPAA and when you're dealing with a business where when you're dealing with insurance reimbursement and Medicaid was often a big piece of that, you need to keep data for 10 years. And if your data is somehow, um, you know, mismanaged is not the right word, corrupted is probably the right word. If somehow the data gets corrupted, you have a big mess on your hands, and we had both of those issues. Part of the reason we had those issues was because the founder, the owner, believed that in a software company, and this is true in a lot of SaaS businesses, every 2 weeks you issue a bug fix or a new enhancement or something to change the software. And what we were doing was every 2 weeks putting new pieces out there or enhancements out there without ever stepping back and looking at the overall architecture. So bugs were added to bugs, which caused some issues. I had customers in my first 30 days call me and tell me that they were looking at they called it the circle of death, the spinning wheel. And one of my clients was like, I've got the circle of death. And, and it was obviously it caused us, and we did have a data issue. Um, no, no client data was lost. I mean, was breached, meaning no personal information, but we did lose some data. Um, and you can't, that is the kiss of death in a software company, especially one that's a medical record, right? An electronic medical record. So there were lots of other challenges. I'd say those are the two biggest ones that caused the board to go search for a new CEO.
Very interesting. Um, I'm curious because it sounds like you've had a little bit of experience by the time you get to Pathfinder in doing sort of turnarounds and clearly solving problems. I mean, when you come into a company like this and you can see that there's some real issues, what are your first steps as a CEO? I mean, are there standard things that you now do because you're used to doing turnarounds, or is it more specific to that company? Like, what do you do when you're looking at a big pile of challenges?
Yeah. Challenges is a good word to go after that pile of. So because I have an accounting finance background, I mean, I think the very first thing I do is look at the financial statements. That's to me, it comes natural to me. It comes naturally to me because I do have an accounting background. But the very first thing I did, well, I did like 5 things simultaneously, right? I love when I get the question, "What keeps you up at night?" I'm like, "It's 30 things that keep me up at night." Tonight it's these 3, tomorrow night it'll be these 3, but I knew I needed to look at the financial statements first, and so that's kinda number 1. 1A would have been calm the fears of the people. Um, so getting the cultural aspect right, understanding what the culture was. So I met with, all 30 employees, half of whom were in Phoenix, Arizona, the other half were in Kansas City, where I am. And I made a point to talk to everyone. And I started every conversation with this is Vegas, right? Everything stays here, number one. And then I said, pretend we're in a Clint Eastwood movie. It's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Start with the good, because that's very important. Tell me everything that's good. Tell me what's bad. And then if there's something ugly, let's get it on the table and help me, figure out what it is. And so I'd say financial statements, number one. Number two, absolutely needed to understand the culture. I met with every single employee. I had detailed conversations with them. And number 3 is I assess the talent. One of the things I promised the board when they offered me the role was I said, "In 30 days, you'll have what I consider to be an assessment of the business. In 60 days, you're gonna have a talent assessment," because I think that's the most important thing. As I said before, if you surround yourself with talented people who complement themselves and you, uh, good things can happen. One of my comments I made to the board when they interviewed me was, financial models don't turn companies around, people do, right? Models don't turn companies around. Spreadsheets don't turn companies around. People do. So I'm going to give you an assessment of the people, and then in 90 days, I'm going to give you my 12 to 18-month plan as I see it today. And I think that kind of big picture strategic plan fits no matter what I've done. And there are nuances, obviously, depending on where you go. Sometimes the talent's not an issue. Sometimes the finances are fine, but there's a cultural issue which is harder to do. But yeah, those three big pieces are what I consider to be my going in game plan when I'm again CEO 2.0. Right? I'm not the person that starts it, I'm the person that hopefully helps it grow. Fix and grow is my favorite thing to do. The fix part's the hard part, and then the grow part's the fun part.
Yeah, cool. I like it. I really like it. It yeah, that's fascinating. When you came in, did the owner, the founder, and the board, the key, I guess, people you were talking to, did they tell you that they wanted you to kind of repair and build and prepare for a sale, or was that kind of not really? It was more just a fixer upper.
What's interesting about that is it was a fixer upper. Um, and when I presented my 90-day, when I was at my 90-day mark and I presented to the board, I go, it will take 12 to 18 months to turn this company around. Here are the big buckets of work we need to do. And, along the way, we're going to, we'll continue to have conversations. I'll tell you where we are. It's 12 to 18-month turnaround, and then we'll talk. Um, and then the CFO and I got really busy and promptly in 7 months had taken $770,000 of run rate cost out of the business.
Wow.
Um, we had S we had s we had plugged the dike for all of the technology issues we were having. So we stopped the bleeding on the software. First thing I did, technology-wise, is I stopped them from releasing new products every 2 weeks to every quarter. And I said, "We have to get our act together here. We're gonna do quarterly releases. We'll do bug fixes all the time, but we're not doing anything major until we know this is a complex piece of software." So I went to quarterly releases except for bug fixes, took $770,000 run rate cost out of the business, and was in the middle of my talent, um, oil change, I would call it, because there were some definite needs that in the talent area that needed to be addressed, and the board came to me and said, "Oh, wow, great, good job, let's go sell it."
Do you think that was in the back of their minds already when they hired you?
look, hindsight being what it is, Simon, yes. I mean, if you go and look at all of my resume, it's turnaround, 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 turnaround. So there's no question that it wasn't, my clever comment about taking on a new challenge that gave me the role. It was probably because they knew that I had investor connections, venture capital connections, private equity firm connections because of places I'd been before, and they'd seen some of my turnaround results from building, from my teams, not me, but from the teams that I had led, and I'm certain it was in the back of their mind when they hired me. I was just
Yeah,
naive enough to think I had 3 years to do it. Ended up I have it
yeah.
like, yeah, like 12 months, but it was good.
That's interesting. I wonder if they, and it's just purely hypothetical, but I wonder if they didn't raise it. I mean, there's probably lots of reasons they didn't raise it because you've got to solve the most immediate problems anyway. But I wonder if that was a concern that they might scare off a new CEO that, hey, actually, this is not going to be a long term gig or something like that. But yeah, it's just fascinating. I would love to have been there to ask questions and see where their thinking was at during that process. It'd be interesting.
It would be, yeah, and I love both of them, highly respect both of them. That the 2 of them, as I referenced, were the 2 biggest investors in the business. Um, yeah, respect them and appreciate their their angle, how they looked at the business, their support of me. One of the things I would say, that doesn't always happen when you've got, especially high net worth family office, investors on your board, the level of support that I had from the board was unbelievable. I mean, I knew that I could make any decision I needed to make, and if I could justify it, I knew that they would support me, um, in those decisions, and that was a big piece of it. Of course, when they told me they wanted me to sell it so soon, I did have an sort of a, "Oh, shoot" moment, like, You know, I'm kind of having fun here, and I love my people, and, I'm seeing the turnaround in them, and this team is gelling, and all that stuff was so fun. But yeah, it's pretty clear that I was brought in to fix it and sell it, and which we did.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. What's your first step? So you get this mandate, you've got to go sell now. I'm curious about this process of selling, right? Because it's there's always, I think, similarities in what a transaction looks like, but I find that every deal is always different because of the people and the company and just the general sort of process and even the timing. So what did that process look like? How long did it take? Where did you start? Like what? Yeah, can you talk us through it a bit?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with, we had been approached by, I want to say at least 3 private equity firms in the space prior to my arrival or right after I arrived, and we said no thank you because we weren't ready. So I kind of had at least 3 players that I knew were interested and that I had a better story to tell, 8, 9 months in than I would have had on day 1. So I had a little bit of a head start there. I also had, as I said, I had a pretty decent network of private equity connections that I had just made in my, over my career. And I used those relationships to just do, if you're not interested, it may not be in your space. Can you introduce me to somebody that might be interested? So that was kind of part of the original, or first step was, all right, now what do I do? Our largest competitor, who I beat my head against a wall every day, to try to win, was one of those parties. And I said, absolutely not. Um, I did not want to sell to our largest competitor. I didn't want to give in. And I was like, no, I want to beat them. I don't want to sell to them. So I started with, again, 2 or 3 that I knew were in the space and wanted to be in the space and had approached us before. I took 2 or 3 connections that I had made a couple of calls, had a couple of conversations, put the competitor on the back burner. And then I didn't, one of the things I did, because we were a small company, and I think this is important for entrepreneurs and small business owners. The first thing that some advisors will tell you as a business owner is you need an investment bank, you need an attorney, you need all these consultants. And I told the board, I don't need any of those things. I do need an attorney. I need a really good attorney, yes, to save me from myself. But I don't need an investment bank to tell my story. I know this company, it's a small company. I'm good. And when I began to start to do due diligence, as potential suitors would send their attorneys to talk to me, the very first thing I would do is take their 21-page due diligence list and go, no, I cut it down to 2 pages, and we are an but we're an open book. So part of what I live by is transparency, honest communication, and everyone that knows me knows that. So anyone that was literally or actually in the game knew that there were gonna be no skeletons, there were gonna be no surprises. So
Yeah.
I didn't spend a ton of my investors' money on investment bankers. I managed the attorneys, which I think is an important part of the process too, because if you don't, the attorneys will
Manage you.
manage you,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then there'll be no money left at the end of the
Yeah.
transaction. So
Yeah.
and then as I began to have conversations, I think in the next part of the next step in the journey was, again, going back to culture, because culture is everything. I wanted a good cultural fit. The thing that kept me awake at night the most in the early days was saving those 30 people's jobs. That was my goal. My goal was to obviously serve the best, uh, get the best deal I could for my investors, but I was hoping to save as many of those 30 jobs as I could.
Yeah.
Um, and so part of what I did was I took my chief technology officer with me on in meetings. I put the sales team in front. I took people that knew the business and I made them part of the conversation. And
Yeah.
cultural fit became that's how I narrowed the list down. It became the factor where I said, not a good fit, not a good fit, good potential fit, good potential fit. Um, and that was an important part for me.
Wow. I've got to pause you there for a second because I've got too many questions. um, just quickly, okay, so just go back to these first couple of people that you were speaking to. You said that they were in the space, and I guess my brain was ticking through thinking, were they in the sort of health clinician space or were they in the software space or was it both?
Interesting. It was a little bit of both, but it was software first.
Okay.
Okay,
Interesting. Yeah.
so yeah, so there are many. Um, there are a lot of private equity firms and a lot of private equity owned firms that are either in healthcare software or in healthcare investing. So part of my narrow down the list exercise was you're in addiction or acute care or hospitals, you're not going to want to buy this thing. So when you start to narrow down to get further into that niche of behavioral health care, which is what ABA therapy is, and understanding the space of SaaS, those were the two that crossed, um, that really told me I had good potential buyers. Because if you don't understand that, and you don't have to know who the clinicians are, although that helps. But I could educate, my team could educate on that piece of it. But if they were big, if they were a Cerner or a big player in electronic medical records, they don't want it. If they were in hospitals, I didn't even bother because we would have
Yeah.
never fit. So it was finding those niche behavioral healthcare, and then SaaS was probably the most important factor, was that they understood the software space.
Yeah, and that you basically answered my next question was that I think certainly in my experience, SaaS companies tend to be valued differently from a traditional business, and we can get to valuation in a moment, but I just think if you're buying businesses on traditional multiples of EBITDA, often they kind of are perplexed. I still find myself being perplexed by how some software companies sell and by what multiples and how much, etc. So I think that understanding of SaaS is a really, really interesting piece of this puzzle that I'd love to pick up again in a moment. My next key question, you talked about not having investment bankers and stuff like that, which I understand. But I'm curious because you mentioned that you came to this with a bunch of contacts, experience, exposure to this kind of stuff already. And I'm curious about how much, as the CEO, I mean, I imagine you've fixed a lot of problems, you've got these teams humming, you're probably less grind operational, you're more strategic. So did it take a lot of time for you then? Did you start dedicating a lot of your time to this process? Whereas, if you'd hired an investment bank, you'd probably expect them to do a lot of heavy lifting for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's 100% right, Simon. Because we were small enough, and again, I knew where all the bodies were buried, so there were going to be no surprises because it was a pretty straightforward transaction in that regard. But yeah, I was 100% strategic. Um, Again, I was looking at cultural fit where I thought I could get the best deal for my customers and for my investors. And I spent most of my time in that, I was in the trenches of the deal. Um, but I was not in the office, going to stand up every day. And we used the agile methodology, and stand up was part of something that I went to every day until I was in the middle of this. So, yeah, I stayed really out of the operations. I trusted the team, especially my CFO, who's a rock star, but I trusted the team to handle the day to day. I brought into my confidence a couple of people that I knew I could trust to say, look, here's what we're doing. Um, and I knew I could trust them, and I depended on them to keep the business humming, and the team happy while I was out, on road shows, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, Third question around that, all of this, you mentioned bringing certain staff in, and I'm fascinated by that because, um, as I hate rules of thumb and all this sort of stuff, but quite typically our approach with a lot of the transactions we do. In fact, it's one of the most common questions I get is, when do I talk to my staff, and when do we talk to other people, and do we have to talk to clients and all this sort of stuff. It's this communication piece wrapped in secrecy that kind of makes people nervous. And um, I guess as a general rule, I'm usually saying to my clients, don't tell anyone who doesn't need to know. Like, really, you just keep it under wraps as long as you possibly can. And every business is a little bit different, but at certain times, particularly if the company's larger too, or if there's specialist skills, you may need to dial in a particular employee or more than one employee. So, but it's such a delicate thing, and of course, there's always this risk of once you start putting people up in front of buyers, there's elements cease to be in your control, and I don't know. There's this kind of makes, I think this stuff keeps business owners up at night as well. So, just curious, you brought people into the mix. What was that like, and what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah, so by the way, I support your view 100%. I mean, in a large company, you don't tell anyone until you absolutely have to. And I'd say even in this case, except for the CFO, who, your CFO knows everything.
Yeah,
Um, the only person I brought under the tent was the chief technology officer. And, you know, and he was a smart cookie. Um, and, I'm probably not a great poker player, though I think I'm a decent poker player. And so when I miss something that I would normally not miss, uh, s but I brought him in, but that was way after. This was the I did not bring him in until I knew we were going down a good path, because I agree with you, the last thing you wanna do is scare everyone,
yeah,
and that's exactly what would happen if you didn't have your story completely tightly wrapped. So I told the whole team after I had signed the LOI.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
that makes a lot of
yeah.
sense.
So So it was my CFO and the that was it. When I say I brought people in, it was those 2 people.
Yeah.
And I trusted them with my life. I mean, I would literally say I could tell somebody, one of those 2, "Here's where the body's buried," and they would say, "Okay, got you covered and got bail money for you." And so, yeah, I mean, you have to, and as I said, there's a point at which it's good because there's a good story to tell. So, I told everyone when I'd signed the LOI, I'd chosen the buyer, I could say 20 things that were positive about it, and that's when I opened up. But no, I agree with you 100%. Even in small companies, so I had 2 out of 30, so there you go. There's your
Yeah.
relative percentage, but, you have to be careful, and you're right, that's something that keeps you up at night is when, how, at what time, and I've had the opportunity to do this a couple of times, and so that was a lesson learned and that I brought with me to this transaction.
Yeah. Yeah. It is such an interesting piece because you can't predict how people are going to react. And we're all on a bell curve, right? Pick an issue, we're all on the bell curve somewhere. And I've seen everything from at one end of the extremes is staff think the sky's falling on their head, and no matter what you tell them, they think this is going to be bad. I'm going to lose my job, or something terrible is going to happen. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who go, "Ooh, acquired by a larger company. This is going to be a great opportunity for me. I'm going to be able to do more stuff, and this is going to be cool." And they're right on the front foot with it. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of people in the middle who kind of go, "Ooh, never done this before. I'll just kind of wait and see." So I'm always sort of interested in how your team might have reacted, and then how does that kind of feed into post-transaction integration, all that sort of other good stuff.
Oh, yeah, by the way, even with 30, you're right, it's still a bell curve.
Yeah,
100%. Um, there were people who knew that they would have a limited amount of time left, the CFO being number 1.
yeah,
We were acquired by bigger business, he knew that. Um, but he's a professional, and I said, I will take care of you. Do you trust me?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And that's a big part of that. It was only 18 months for me in total, but I established a relationship of trust with those people from the very beginning. That is so important. I mean, it's so important. So when I said, "Do you trust me?" Yes. Okay. Then I'm going to tell you what I can tell you, and you're going to ask me questions, and I'm going to say, "I can't answer that." And that was part of the conversation too. Is I don't know. I can't. Or I do know, but I can't share that with you right now. But you have to trust me. And so I didn't have too many people who. Well, I had a couple that were, again, the bell curve is 100% right. I had some that were just, like, nervous beyond belief, right?
yeah,
And the conversations that I had with those people went something like, "You're talented, you are employable. If you wanna go look for a job, I will be a reference for you
yeah,
because I get it. I think you've got a career here. I think you've got future potential here. But if you don't want to take that risk, I get it. Get your resume together, bring it to my office. I'll walk through it with you. I'll help you, and we'll find you another job." That takes their fear away, right? Then those that go, "All right, cool, let's do this." I was like, "Okay, you need to just be patient till I've signed on the dotted line. Then I'm gonna introduce you to this person and this person and this person and this person, and you start thinking about what do you wanna do?
yeah, yeah,
What would be fun for you? How do you wanna do it? And then we'll build a career path for you inside this larger organization. It's gonna be awesome." And then
yeah,
those in the middle who said, "Okay, just gonna play this out." Those are you have those everywhere, and those are your good foot soldiers. Those are your people that are gonna still show up. They're gonna do what you ask them to do. They're gonna do their jobs. They're gonna take care of their customers, and you're gonna do your best as a CEO, to take care of those people. yeah,
Yeah.
by pointing out their talents, making sure that they're on somebody's radar, when you're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes perfect sense. It sounds like you handled it really well. Um, Okay, couple of quick rapid fire questions. Then I want to move on to kind of what you're doing these days and where you've moved on, because obviously you've moved on from Pathfinder. But um, in terms of months, how long did the sale process take from you being given a mandate to closing the deal, you're making a public announcement?
15 months,
Yeah.
give or take.
And
Yeah.
and that is a really good thing. I hope any of the listeners hearing this who are thinking of selling, you need to keep that kind of time frame in your mind, because that is normal. I always say to our clients, you've got to give me at least 12 months. Like, in fact, if I get it done earlier, happy days. But if you're not thinking a solid 12 months in your mind, and I've had deals that have gone to 18 months and even a bit longer than that.
Yep.
But yeah, you need to allow yourself enough runway to get through it, find the right buyers, and get the deal done.
Find the right buyers, number 1, and then number 2, even when you find them, something is going to happen. It is
Totally.
inevitable. And when you think you're done, you've got 90 more days. And
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so yes, it was I would say the same thing to anyone. I would go, you think you've got the right buyer, it's 3 months, add at least 6 to whatever you think,
Yeah.
and maybe more.
Yeah, it's funny because I've had clients who are talking to us about us helping them with the process, and they go, "Oh, well, I've already had somebody approach me. Like half the work's done." I'm like, "Oh my goodness! Like somebody's tapped you on the shoulder. These guys could be wasting your time. Like you've done 0.01% of this process. Like you've found a potential buyer. Whoop de doo. Like it's so much
It is
more.
true. And then what the other part I think that's important, there's only so much of it that's in your control.
Yeah,
Right? So you say, "Oh, I signed everything, I completed the due diligence, I filled the data room, I did it all." And then you're sitting there, doing this because your potential buyer has an emergency board meeting
yep,
and they change their strategic direction and yank the funding that was gonna buy you. That actually happened to us.
totally.
Um, so
Yeah,
yeah.
we had COVID hit, right? I mean, how many deals we had going, and the amount of guys, and whether it was private equity or an industry buyer, who'd go, "Sorry, we can't do the meetings this week. We've had to have a crisis board meeting about some other issue." And it's like, fair enough. Like, it's not their fault. They don't want to do that stuff. They don't want to deal with drama. But at the end of the day, what might have been a 2 month due diligence process for some of them took 5 months.
Yeah.
It was out of our control. So I think, yeah, really important for anyone thinking about a transaction to to play the long game. Don't get overly anxious. Understand that deal fatigue is a real thing, and you need to manage yourself through that process so you don't become too tired or too frustrated. Um, so that's definitely one of the big takeaways. Um, Once you got the deal done, Tina, how long did you hang around after that?
Um, Longer than you would think, that would be normal because I ended up selling to my largest competitor
Yep.
after I met so what's interesting is my biggest competitor and I lived parallel lives. I was 7 months ahead of him, give or take, 6 months ahead of him. So, I was brought in to replace the founder. He was brought in to replace the founder. He was a SaaS guy, I was not a SaaS guy, but he did exactly the same things that I had done just 6 months later than I had done them. So when he came to Kansas City, he goes, "Please just let me come and meet you." Fell in love with him immediately, in that culture is everything to him. He's a transparent, honest leader. He surrounds himself with with talented people. He's got a great heart and he knew everything that was wrong with the business that he took over, which was everything that was wrong with the business that I took over. So we actually laughed and he said, "You're 6 months ahead of me on that, and you're only 3 months ahead of me on that." And so we had this great conversation, and I went, "Fine, you are the perfect buyer." So they asked me to stay for 1 year, and I signed an agreement, and it was really a transition agreement. But what was really cool about it was about halfway through that year, he offered me a permanent position, and I'd still be there today. I would still be there today had it not been for this other opportunity that came around because he he wanted me on his team. He valued what I had done at Pathfinder, and what he discovered when he looked at the market was that the Pathfinder product he bought really was our bread and butter, as I said, was sort of the very small business side of the house. The product that my competitor had, Central Reach, served the largest side part of the industry. So he goes, "Will you just run the small business practice for me?" I'm like, "So I get to
Easy.
basically do
Yeah.
the same thing I did before, but I didn't have to deal with COVID." And in fact, because COVID hit right around this time, and he told we'd have, we'd talk every week, and I'd say, "Man, I'm glad it's you and not me." I'm like, "No offense. I'm so happy I'm not the CEO right now in all this mess." But,
Yeah.
yeah, so it was a one-year transition, which I think is probably pretty normal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Absolutely.
I was just lucky enough that, he asked me to stick around,
Yeah.
and I did, and so I got to see the whole transition and integration come to fruition. All those people whose jobs I saved 25 out of 30, by the way, which was maybe our greatest accomplishment. But I got to see all of those people in their new roles with their new bosses. I continued to mentor them through it. I'd get calls and I'd go, "Hey, he's a good guy. This is your new. I've met with him. He's a good guy. Try this. Try that approach." And
Yeah.
help them through that bumpy integration part. So, yeah, it was really cool. And again, if this awesome new thing hadn't come along, I'd still be there.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Final question, and then let's talk a little bit about what you're doing today. But I don't know if you can share the actual valuation or what the business sold for. But can you tell us? Are you able to share how the company was valued? Like, was it a multiple of EBITDA? Was it a multiple of revenue? How was it kind of structured?
I can't reveal numbers, but I can tell you it was a multiple of revenue. Um, ARR, annual recurring revenue.
Yep.
Um, so which is pretty typical in especially a startup. We were 8 years old, but still in software years, we were still considered a startup. So it was a multiple of ARR, annual recurring revenue, with a retention trigger to it. So
Cool.
there was I think it was 18 months. I think it was 18 months. So when we inked the deal, we got some cash up front, which again is pretty typical. So we got some cash up front, and then we got a kicker based on an annual recurring revenue retention rate. So if we during the integration convince the customers not to leave, to stay with us, because again, we were competitors before, so there was a lot. This is a very small community, by the way. The therapist community is a very small one, very tight knit. And there were some of the therapists who loved us and hated them, or loved them and hated us. And
Yeah.
with absolutely zero empirical evidence to support their feeling. But part of our job in that 12 months post the deal close was to keep as many of those customers as we could. Um, I actually liked that approach. I loved, get some cash up front. That shows that they believe in us. But then they really kept us on the hook, and I thought that was a really good way to do it, to say, "Here's your annual recurring revenue today. If you keep some X percent of it, you get this. If you keep a larger percent, you get a kicker." And so that really gave the team, a 12-month project. And because of the 6 to 12-month subscription renewals, it went out to
Yeah.
about 18 months. Yeah.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I agree. That's a good metric if you're going to have some kind of performance metric around the consideration. I've seen earnouts and things like that fail miserably because they've become overly complicated. Frankly, at times I've seen what I believed was buyers intentionally trying to make it complex so that they would have lots of wriggle room to get out of paying. I don't think most people are like that at all. I think most people just want to see success and see things work. But having something around retention, it's manageable, right? You can engage those clients, you can control it. You can't necessarily manage the margin because they can put all sorts of expenses through your business and your P&L. But yeah, retention. I mean, that's manageable, controllable, and simple. I like it. I think it's a good idea.
I liked it too, and I will say this too because I think it's important for your listeners. There were times when, as the seller, I was dealing with the buyer's finance team or the attorneys or whatever, and I would just go, "You know what? Time out, pencils down," and I'd call the CEO directly, and I would say, "Do you and I agree on the intent?" "Yes." "Will you trust?" "Yes." And so he and I would say he'd go, "I'll take care of it," or I would say, "I'll take care of it," 'cause it's so easy for those kinds of, over-engineered, you know, super complicated, ridiculous metrics because you've got, finance and quantitative people that love that stuff, and so sometimes the CEOs have to call timeout, get on the phone, agree to it, and then tell their people to go paper what they just said.
Yeah,
That saves months of time, and I'm telling you, I don't care how big or how small you are, I truly believe, and it's happened at least 2 or 3 times in my career where you just gotta go, "Pencils down, I'll be back."
yeah,
And, the 2 business owners, because at the end of the day, you're the business owner. It's your business, and the business buyer wants to buy the business. They don't wanna buy your customer list. They don't wanna buy, just your talent. They really want it to work, and so, that's my last little thing is make sure sometimes if you need to just call time out, the 2 CEOs get together, they agree on it, then they tell their team to go make it happen, and that will speed up the process quite a bit.
Brilliant advice. Absolutely brilliant advice. It's I've seen you do. You talk about technical people, and then throw in the mix that with a bunch of lawyers who. And don't get me wrong, we're all on a bell curve, right? I've seen fabulous lawyers and terrible lawyers and everything in between. But
Yes.
in actual fact, anybody listening to this, if you are going to do a deal, having a lawyer that not just does lots of transactions, but they have a very commercial approach to them, like it's not about winning little micro technical debates in every single clause of a contract. It's actually about trying to get the right deal done. And if you can't, if you get a very ego driven person who wants to win every argument, your deal's going to fail. And I've seen situations like you said there, Tina, where the 2 CEOs or owners have just had to go, hey, let's just take an honest, upfront commercial approach to this. Like, as you said, what is the intent? What is it that we're trying
Yep,
to achieve? Let's make sure the words reflect that. Um,
yep,
so yeah, brilliant, really, really good advice on that. It's not only could save deals, it could save a lot of money and time. So that's cool. Thank you, thank you. What an experience. I mean, I just what a wonderful journey, and it's I just think there's so many amazing tips and insights there for people who are going to think about their own exit. Um, so, so tell us, where did you go after that? Like, what happened after? So, Central Reach, you did your time there, and now I think you're at Technology Acceleration Partners or Tech Excel.
yeah, so opportunity came to, jump into the animal health and agriculture innovation space because why not? Um, it was really an opportunity. It's a Kansas City-based company, and, it has the who's who of Kansas City investors behind it, and it was another one of those really unique things where a job was posted that I was my second favorite job I've ever had other than being the CEO. Myself, my favorite job was the right hand of the CEO. That's when I've had the most fun. That job was posted. I applied for it thinking nothing's ever going to happen. Um, got through the interview, made it to the top, whatever. Um, and then about 6 months in, they started talking about a co-leadership model and made me chief enterprise officer at the end of the year. So what we do is we find technologies, innovations, novel breakthrough science in plant science or in animal health. We take our investors' dollars and advance that science, and then we sell it to a strategic or um, a venture capital firm. And the co-leadership model is probably the coolest thing I've ever done. So the founder and president still here. He's in charge of all things science, and as chief enterprise officer, I'm in charge of everything not related to science. So it's a really cool partnership model where I get to hang out with, into senior research entomologists and, molecular biologists and all kinds of things. But I don't have to actually know what they do, because my job is, investor relations and actually capital raising, fundraising, um, and all things not related to the science piece, but everything else related to the business. So it's again one of the coolest things I've ever done, and I really value and respect the founder quite a bit. So we make a really good team. We make a good partnership.
That's really cool. I've had the pleasure of working in a company where we had brilliant scientists, and as more of a commercial sort of market facing kind of guy that I've always been, I loved being able to go to market and talk up these people. Like, hey, hey, I'm here to have the conversation, but like these are the geniuses, and wow, like I was proud of it. I was excited to be able to go and talk about what they did and why it made us different and how it would impact our clients. And it comes back to, I think, what you said at the very beginning of this interview, right? Is being surrounded by really smart people who hopefully are pretty cool to work with, and frankly, hopefully smarter than myself anyway, or certainly my situation. So,
Definitely
yeah,
smarter than me. Yeah, I have a PhD in accounting, and I'm the dumbest person in the room. I always laugh about it because, like, they've all got PhDs, that's nothing, and so my piddly little PhD in accounting is like, whatever. Um, but
yeah, that's funny.
it is so cool, and to your point, I'd love to kick off a conversation with a potential suitor for one of our products and go, "Here I am. I don't do anything that's any fun. Let me introduce you to Candace and the team." And then they start talking about, you know, the mid-intestinal gut gene of a lepidopterid, and I just sit back and smile because it's fascinating to watch and to watch scientists go at each other and then have one of them have an aha moment. You can literally see the light bulb go off over their head.
Yeah.
Um, but it's and it's mission driven too. We're trying to change the way we feed the world and save the planet at the same time. Everything we do is sustainable and non-GMO and all those fun things. And so, yeah, I'm continuing in my desire to live a purpose driven life. It's great.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, look, congratulations on everything you've achieved. It's you've obviously had an amazing career. You've no doubt had an enormous impact on a lot of people's lives. And I think when we're all lying on our deathbed one day, I don't think we're going to be thinking, "Geez, I wish I made more money," or "Geez, I wish I ticked more boxes." It's going to be, "Hey, geez, I wish I had more time with those people," and being grateful for the sort of impact that we've been able to have on other people's lives. And so, clearly you've done some amazing stuff. So congrats on everything you've done.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your time. This has been a ton of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, well, look, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing, and I'm really appreciative of it all. And it's you've been wonderful and gracious. So thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing, and look, hopefully we can get you on after the next stage of your journey and hear what else happens.
My pleasure. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Let's talk again.
Look forward to it. Thanks again.
Thank you.